September 14th, 2017. $347,800. One signature from my father, one from me, and exactly zero from the man who would, 6 years later, look across our dining room table and call me a leech. I remember the date because it was the day my father handed me a cream-colored envelope with a cashier's check inside for the entire down payment. We were standing in the parking lot of the title company in Arlington, Virginia, and the September heat was coming off the asphalt in waves. "This stays between us," he said. He died. 8 months later, a heart attack in his own driveway while holding the morning newspaper. I kept his secret because I thought I was protecting my husband's pride. What I did not know was that my husband had already built a case against me inside his own head, and the first piece of evidence he planned to use was the very thing I had been trying to shield him from. My name is not what matters in this story, but my profession is. I am a forensic accountant. I spent 15 years tracking financial anomalies for a mid-sized firm in Richmond, Virginia, before I stepped back to freelance after my daughter was born. The word forensic is important because it means I know how to follow a paper trail. I know that numbers do not lie and that people do. I was the person my colleagues brought the cases nobody else wanted to touch, because I had a reputation for finding what everyone else missed. I could spot a rounding discrepancy in a 40-page audit from across a conference table. I once caught a 6-figure embezzlement scheme because a single decimal point was in the wrong column on a quarterly report. I was trained to see what other people tried to hide, and I was very good at it. And yet, for 11 years of marriage, I let myself believe I was bad at reading the person I shared a bed with. We met in 2010 at a friend's wedding in Charlottesville. He was handsome in an uncomplicated way, good jawline, easy laugh. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make people feel like they had known him for years. We were married in 2011, a small ceremony on the lawn of my father's house, overlooking the James River. My father gave a toast that I have replayed in my head 1,000 times since. He said, "Marriage is not about finding someone you can live with. It is about finding someone you cannot live without, and then learning to live with them anyway." Everyone laughed. I thought it was a joke. I understand now that it was a warning. Our daughter was born in 2016. She came into the world 9 days late, with a full head of dark hair and a cry that sounded like a siren from another dimension. I remember the exact weight of her in my arms, 7 pounds, 11 ounces, and the way the hospital room smelled of antiseptic and flowers. My husband was there for the delivery. He held my hand. He cried when she was born. I have thought about that moment a lot since everything fell apart because it was real. Whatever else he became, whatever lies he told and secrets he kept, the man who cried when his daughter was born was real. That is the part I cannot reconcile, and the part I have stopped trying to reconcile. I took 12 weeks of maternity leave and then returned to work part-time, then freelance, because the cost of full-time childcare in our area was more than I was bringing home after taxes. It was a practical decision, the kind women make every day without realizing they are trading career trajectory for household stability. I became the default parent, the default household manager, the default person who knew where the extra keys were and when the oil needed changing and which forms needed to be signed for school. I told myself it was a temporary arrangement, that we were a team and teams distribute labor unevenly during certain seasons. I believed that so completely that I stopped noticing when the distribution stopped being uneven and started being unfair. The house we bought in 2017 was a colonial revival in Henrico County. It needed work. The previous owners had let the landscaping go and the kitchen counters were laminate, but it had good bones. The mortgage application process was straightforward until the loan officer pulled both of our credit scores. Mine was excellent. His was not. The loan officer suggested we apply using only my income and my credit profile to secure a more favorable rate. She said we could add him to the deed later once his credit recovered. He agreed without argument. I remember thinking he was being gracious about an awkward situation. What I did not realize was that he was already building a story about me, the story where I was the lucky one, the one who owed him something. The deed in my name alone was a detail that did not fit that story, so he simply stopped thinking about it. The inciting discovery arrived on a Tuesday night in March of 2023. It did not come as a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession. It arrived as a credit card statement he had left face down on the kitchen counter, next to a stack of mail I was sorting while waiting for water to boil for pasta. I flipped it over to put it with his papers. I was not snooping, I was organizing, a distinction our marriage counselor would later press me on. And I saw a charge at a hotel in Fredericksburg for $217 on a Friday afternoon when he had told me he was working late. My fingers did not tremble. My breathing did not change. I set the statement down, finished sorting the mail, and started cooking dinner. But inside my head, a file had opened. I spent that night lying perfectly still next to him in the dark, staring at the ceiling, running every odd behavior from the previous 6 months through my mental spreadsheet. The late meetings that never appeared on his shared calendar. The new cologne he claimed a coworker had gifted him. The way he had started holding his phone at a specific angle when I entered a room, tilting the screen away. Just slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough that my trained pattern recognition brain registered it every single time. The way he had started showering immediately when he came home, even on days when he had been sitting in an air-conditioned office for 8 hours. I had noted all of it, filed it away, and told myself I was being paranoid. I was not being paranoid. I was being a forensic accountant who had temporarily forgotten she was also a wife. The next morning, I waited until he left for work, and then I began the longest and most methodical investigation of my life. This is the part of the story where most people expect me to say I fell apart. I did not fall apart. I fell upward into competence, the way I had been trained to do in every crisis of my adult life. I opened my laptop, logged into our joint credit card account, the one I managed because he had always claimed to be bad with that stuff, and I downloaded every statement going back 18 months. I exported them into a spreadsheet color-coded by category and started looking for patterns. 45 minutes later, I found the first confirmed anomaly. A recurring charge at a floral shop in a zip code that was not ours every 2 weeks starting in November of the previous year. No birthdays in that zip code, no anniversaries, no hospitalized relatives. Just flowers every 14 days charged to a joint account he knew I reviewed monthly. Either he wanted me to find it, or he had gotten sloppy, or he had become so accustomed to my trust that he had stopped thinking of me as someone who paid attention. On day 2, I started keeping a physical journal. I bought a black spiral notebook from a drugstore and wrote down everything I remembered from the previous 6 months. I filled 17 pages in a single sitting. Every late night, every canceled plan, every offhand comment that had not sat right at the time. I dated each entry. I cross-referenced them against his work calendar, which I had access to because I managed our family scheduling. The discrepancies were everywhere. A board meeting that did not appear on the company's published calendar. A client dinner at a restaurant that had been closed for renovations. A work trip to Norfolk that coincided with a hotel charge in a different city entirely. I had been living inside a web of small lies for so long that I had stopped noticing the texture of the fabric. The evidence-gathering phase consumed the next month of my life. I conducted it in the hours between when he left for work and when I picked up our daughter from school, roughly 6 hours per day, 5 days per week, for a total of over 100 hours of quiet, methodical investigation. Some days I did not leave the house at all. I sat in my home office with the blinds half closed, moving through digital records the way I had moved through audit files for 15 years, looking for discrepancies, tracing transactions, following the money to wherever it led. Other days I drove. I visited the floral shop in the unfamiliar zip code and stood outside long enough to confirm it was real. I drove past Danielle's neighborhood not to see her, but to understand the geography of the life my husband was living when he was not home with us. I conducted the investigation while pretending to watch television next to him. On the couch, my laptop open to what looked like a freelance project, but was actually an evidence file organized by date, dollar amount, and emotional weight. I assigned each piece of evidence a number from 1 to 10 based on how much it would hurt to read aloud in front of a judge. The credit card statement was a 3. The floral shop receipts were a 5. What came later would break the scale entirely. I photographed every document with my phone and stored the images in a password-protected folder under a name he would never think to search. For I backed up every file to 2 separate cloud accounts he did not know existed. I made physical photocopies of every check, image, and bank statement and deposited them in a safety deposit box at a bank in a different county. I was not being dramatic. I was being methodical. This was what I was trained to do, and I finally understood why my subconscious had been collecting puzzle pieces for months. It had known before I did, and it had been preparing. On day 4, I found the hotel receipts. 11 separate stays at 4 different hotels. Over 6 months, a Holiday Inn Express in Fredericksburg, a Hampton Inn in Short Pump, a Marriott near the airport, and a boutique bed and breakfast in a town I had never heard of. Every stay was a weekday afternoon, never overnight, never on weekends. He was spending the afternoon with her, 2 to 4 hours at a time, scheduled between meetings like conference calls. The efficiency of the betrayal was almost impressive. I sat in my home office with the printouts spread across my desk and calculated the total, $1,843 over 6 months. That was less than we had spent on our family vacation to the Outer Banks the previous summer. He had invested less in his secret life than we had invested in a week of memories. On day 7, I found her name. It was attached to a Venmo transaction, a payment for dinner, $112, sent to a username I did not recognize. A quick search led me to a public profile, then to a LinkedIn page, then to her employer, a real estate agency in Henrico County. She was a realtor. Her name was Danielle. She sold houses for a living. The irony of my husband cheating on me with a woman whose profession was selling the thing I owned outright was not lost on me, and I noted it in my file. On day 11, I found the thing that changed everything. Inside a bank statement sent to his personal email address, one I had never been given access to, which I discovered only because a password reset confirmation had appeared on our shared home computer, was a recurring transfer of $750 per month, sent to an account at a credit union I had never heard of. The transfers had started 14 months before the first hotel receipt. $750 every month for 14 months. Over $10,000 moved from our joint finances to an account I had never known existed. He had been hiding money from our marriage before he ever started the affair. The affair and the financial secrecy were related, but they were not the same sin. One was a wound to my heart. The other was a breach of the contract that underpinned our entire life together, and it was the one I could prove in a court of law. On day 14, I called my father's attorney. His name was Michael Shea. He had been my father's best friend since law school, 73 years old, with white hair and reading glasses that lived on the end of his nose. He had drafted my father's will with the precision of 4 decades of practice. When I told him what I had found, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you still have the envelope your father gave you at the closing?" I told him I did. It was in the fireproof safe in my bedroom closet, next to my passport and my daughter's birth certificate. "Good," he said. "Bring it to my office tomorrow and bring the deed." I brought both. The deed to our house, the one my husband had helped paint and furnish and refinish the hardwood floors of, the one he had hung curtains in and mowed the lawn of every Saturday from April through October, was in my name only. It had always been in my name only. The original mortgage document listed me as the sole borrower. The warranty deed, recorded in the county clerk's office 4 days after closing, listed me as the sole grantee. His name appeared nowhere. He had never been added. The understanding that his name would be added once his credit improved had never been formalized in writing. The house was mine, legally and unambiguously, and had been for 6 years. But Michael Shea gave me something else that day. He handed me a copy of my father's will, open to a page I had not fully appreciated until he pointed to it and said, "Read that part again." It was a clause specifying that the down payment gift, $347,800, was classified as separate property under Virginia law, with a documented paper trail and a notarized letter from my father stating unequivocally that the funds were intended for me alone, not for the marital estate. My father had drafted that clause with Michael Shea 6 months before the closing. He had known something I did not. He had never said a word against my husband, had never warned me, had never even hinted at doubt. But he had structured his generosity with the foresight of a man who had seen enough of the world to know that love does not always protect you, and that the best protection you can give someone is the kind they do not know they need until they are standing in the middle of it. I spent the next 3 weeks continuing my investigation in secret. I did not confront him. I did not change my behavior, my tone, or my routine. I made his coffee in the morning, in the same blue mug he had used since before we were married. I asked about his day when he came home, and I listened to the lies without reacting. I sat next to him on the couch while he scrolled through his phone, appearing to do the same while reviewing documents saved in a private folder. I was performing normalcy with the same precision I had applied to my evidence file, and I discovered something deeply unsettling about myself during those weeks. I was very good at it. The same emotional compartmentalization that made me an excellent forensic accountant made me an excellent liar. I smiled at him across the dinner table while knowing I was about to dismantle the life we had built. I said, "I love you too," when he said it at night, in the same tone I had always used. I kissed him goodbye in the morning while the final version of my legal strategy sat open on my laptop in the home office he never entered because he had always said that room was too messy. I let him believe I was still the dependent wife he had described to his mistress, the woman he had called a leech, the woman he had painted as a burden, and I let that belief become the weapon he never saw coming. During those 3 weeks, I expanded my investigation beyond the financial records. I requested our phone records and cross-referenced his call log against his calendar. I found 47 calls to a number I did not recognize, placed during business hours, each lasting between 12 and 38 minutes. I traced that number to a cell phone registered to Danielle's address. I found text message metadata through our shared account billing, not the content, but the frequency and timing. They had exchanged over 3,000 text messages in the previous 4 months. 120 days, an average of 25 messages per day every single day for 4 months, while I sat next to him on the couch and asked how his day was. That was the detail that broke something open inside me. Not the hotel receipts, not the floral charges, not even the hidden account. The sheer volume of communication, the daily, hourly, minute-by-minute contact with someone who was not me, was what I could not unsee. I had been sitting next to a man who was having a parallel relationship in the palm of his hand, and I had not noticed because I had been too busy managing the life he was pretending to participate in. I also began documenting my own daily life, a parallel record that would serve as evidence of my role as primary caregiver. I photographed the meals I cooked, the school pickups I handled alone, the doctor's appointments I scheduled and attended without him. I took screenshots of our shared calendar showing my name on every parent-teacher conference, every pediatrician visit, every extracurricular drop-off. I created a timeline of my contributions to the household, measured in hours and dollars and labor. It was not for the court, though Michael Shea said it would help. It was for me. I needed to see in black and white that I had not been the leech. I had been the one holding everything up while he stood on my shoulders and complained about the view. On day 23 of my investigation, I found the second layer of the secret. I had been so focused on his hidden credit union account that I had not fully examined where the money was going. When I finally traced the destination of those $750 monthly transfers, I discovered he had been making payments on a piece of real estate I had never heard of. A rural lot in Spotsylvania County, nearly 2 hours west of our house, purchased in his name only with a construction loan attached. I pulled the property records from the county assessor's website. The lot was 7 acres on a road called Raven Lane. The building permit showed plans for a 3-bedroom house, approximately 1,800 square feet. He was building something. A house, or a cabin, or a future I was not part of. The property had been purchased 14 months before. The first hotel receipt. He had been planning an exit for over a year before the affair began. The affair was not the plan. The affair was a side effect of the plan. The real plan was to leave me with nothing while he started over in a place I did not know existed, with money he had been siphoning from our joint accounts since before I ever suspected a thing. That discovery erased any remaining ambiguity. Up until that moment, I had still been holding space for the possibility, small, flickering, embarrassing, that this was a temporary lapse, something we could address in counseling and move past. The lot, the construction loan, the secret account opened months before the affair, that made it impossible to pretend. He had been preparing to leave me for longer than he had been seeing her. I was not a wife he had betrayed in a moment of weakness. I was a line item on a budget he had already finalized. I called Michael Shea again. He told me to come to his office the following Monday with everything I had gathered. When I arrived, he had a paralegal with him, a young woman named Rachel with precise handwriting and a calm demeanor, who organized my documents into 3 color-coded binders. The first for financial records, the second for infidelity evidence, the third for property documents including the deed, my father's will, the notarized gift letter, and the Spotsylvania County records. Michael looked at the 3 binders stacked on his conference table and said, "This is the strongest case I have seen in 15 years of family law. He does not have a leg to stand on." I asked what that meant in practical terms. He told me that, with the deed in my name alone, the separate property designation on the down payment, and the documentation of his hidden account and secret property purchase, I could file for divorce on grounds of adultery and fraud, and I would almost certainly be awarded full ownership of the marital home, sole physical custody of our daughter, and a significant portion of his future income as child support. He also told me that I could pursue legal action to recover the funds he had diverted to the Spotsylvania property. I asked one more question that day, whether I was required to tell my husband I knew about the lot and the construction loan. Michael Shea looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "You are not required to show your hand until discovery, and as your attorney, I would advise you not to." I took his advice. The confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon in late April of 2023. I had chosen the date with the same precision I had applied to everything else. It was his mother's 63rd birthday, and we were scheduled to have a family dinner at our house. The guest list included his mother, his sister, his brother-in-law, and as I had recently discovered through text messages, his mistress. His sister had been unknowingly befriending Danielle through a mutual acquaintance at the gym and had invited her as a surprise guest, believing she was doing something kind. The text messages between my husband and Danielle discussing this were among the most surreal things I read during my investigation. They were worried about acting natural, worried about me finding out. They had no idea I already knew everything and that I had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. I made a decision I still think about. I let the dinner happen. I did not cancel it. I did not warn anyone. I let the stage be set exactly as it was because I wanted an audience, and because I wanted him to have enough rope to hang himself in front of the people whose opinion he valued most. I do not know if it was the right decision or a kind one or a fair one, but it was the one I made. The afternoon started quietly. I made a salad with vegetables from the farmer's market, heirloom tomatoes, cucumbers, red onion, a vinaigrette I had been making from the same recipe for 15 years. I set the table with the good dishes, the white ceramic ones my mother-in-law had given us as a wedding present, the ones we only used for holidays and birthdays. I helped my daughter with her math homework at the kitchen counter. He came downstairs at 4 o'clock wearing a blue polo shirt I had bought him for Christmas 2 years earlier. He had dressed carefully, nicer than he would for a regular dinner. Not so nice that it would draw attention. He kissed me on the cheek, a mechanical peck that landed on skin I had been clenching for weeks, and asked what time everyone was arriving. 6, I told him. He nodded and went into the living room to watch the golf tournament. I stood in the kitchen with my hands flat on the granite countertop and breathed slowly in and out until the urge to throw something passed. Everyone arrived at 6, as planned, within minutes of each other. His mother brought a store-bought chocolate cake with white frosting in a plastic carrier, the same kind she had brought to every family gathering for as long as I had known her. His sister and brother-in-law brought a bottle of wine I recognized from our own rack. She had grabbed it without asking, the way family does when they feel entitled. And Danielle walked through the door at 6:13, introduced as my new friend from the gym, wearing a light blue sundress and flat sandals, her brown hair pulled back, smiling easily at the room full of people and the house that belonged to me. I watched my husband's face when he saw her. It lasted less than a second, a flicker of panic so brief. It could have been a trick of the light, gone before anyone else in the room would have registered it. But I had been watching for it. I had been watching for weeks. I saw it, noted it, and continued stirring the pasta on the stove as though nothing had happened. We ate dinner at 7. The conversation was painfully ordinary: complaints about a difficult manager at his mother's office, updates about his sister's children, a debate about a new restaurant. My husband sat at the head of the table, the seat he had always claimed. Danielle sat 2 chairs to his left, between his sister and his mother. I sat at the opposite end, the serving end, where the food came out of the kitchen and the empty plates came back. I had spent 11 years at that end of the table. I had never resented it until that moment, when I realized I had built an entire career around finding patterns that other people missed, and I had somehow missed the pattern of my own progressive diminishment. After dinner, I cleared the plates. I brought out the cake. I lit the candles, all 63 of them, because his mother had insisted, and because I wanted the moment to be slow and deliberate and impossible to forget. She leaned forward to blow them out, and I said, in the same tone I would use to ask someone to pass the salt, "Actually, before we have cake, I have something I need to share." The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when someone breaks the social script in an irreversible way. My husband looked at me with a question in his eyes. His sister looked confused. His mother looked pleased, probably assuming I was about to announce a pregnancy or a promotion. Danielle looked down at her hands, folded in her lap, the knuckles white. I stood up, walked to the sideboard against the wall, and pulled open the top drawer. I had placed 3 things in that drawer before anyone arrived: a copy of the deed, a copy of my father's will with the separate property clause highlighted in yellow, and a printout of the credit card statement with 11 hotel charges circled in red ink. I carried them back to the table and set them down in front of me, face down, with my palm resting flat on top. "Your son has been having an affair with Danielle." I said it directly to his mother because I knew it would land harder coming from outside the marriage than from inside it. She looked at me, then at him, then at Danielle, whose face had drained of color so quickly that I could see the individual capillaries beneath her skin. "He has been hiding money from me for over a year," I continued, still speaking to his mother, "and he has purchased property in another county without my knowledge. I have documented all of it." I turned the documents over, one by one, and spread them across the white tablecloth between the salt shaker and the birthday cake. His sister gasped, a short, sharp sound like she had been pinched. Her husband reached for her hand without looking away from the papers on the table. His mother set down her fork. The metal clicked against the ceramic plate with a sound that seemed to echo in the silence. My husband did not say anything for a long moment. He stared at the documents, and I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. He was trying to determine how much I knew, how much I could prove, and whether there was a way to talk his way out of it. I had seen that exact calculation on the faces of executives I had caught falsifying financial records. The same pause, the same mental scramble for an exit that did not exist. It looked exactly the same on the face of the man I had married as it had on the faces of strangers across conference room tables. He opened his mouth to speak. I stopped him before he could form a word. "Before you say anything, you should know that I have already filed. The divorce papers were served to your office this morning. You should also know that this house is mine. It has always been mine. The deed is in my name alone. The down payment came from my father and was classified as separate property under Virginia law with a notarized paper trail that predates our marriage. You have no claim to this house, to the equity in it, or to any of the furniture inside it. I am not a leech. I am the person who has been carrying this family financially, administratively, and emotionally for 11 years while you siphoned money into a secret account to build a life that did not include me or your daughter. And now you do not get to have either one." Danielle was crying. I had not expected her to cry, and I did not feel satisfaction at the sight of it. She looked at me with an expression I could not quite name: shame, maybe, or relief, or a combination that does not have a word in English. She stood up, excused herself in a voice that barely carried past her own chair, and walked out of the house. His sister followed her, calling her name down the front hallway. The front door opened and closed with a soft click. His mother sat perfectly still. She was looking at her son, her only son, the one she had raised and defended against every teacher who had ever said he was not working to his potential. And the expression on her face was one I had never seen before. She looked as though she was seeing him clearly for the first time in his entire life, and she did not recognize the person in front of her. My husband said 3 words, not "I'm sorry," not "I love you." He looked at the deed on the table, looked at me, and said, "You planned this." It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with something that might have been the beginning of respect or the beginning of hatred, and I was not sure which one I preferred. I told him the truth. "I have been planning this since the day you called me a leech. I just needed to make sure I had the evidence to back it up." He left that night. He did not pack a bag. He did not take anything from the house except the car keys and his phone. He went to his mother's house first, then to a hotel, then to the partially finished construction site on Raven Lane in Spotsylvania County, the house he had been building for a future that did not include us. His sister called a week later to tell me he was living in a structure with no heat and no running water, sleeping on an air mattress in a room without drywall. The aftermath was not clean because real life is never clean. His mother sent me a letter 6 weeks later, handwritten on stationery I recognized from her kitchen drawer. She apologized for how she had raised him. She thanked me for not cutting off her access to her granddaughter. She said she was ashamed, and I believed her. I wrote back a short note accepting her apology, because holding a grudge against a 73-year-old woman who had just learned her son was not the person she thought he was would have cost more energy than I had to spare. His sister stopped speaking to him entirely. She came over one Saturday in May to help me paint the living room. We did not talk about her brother. We talked about paint colors and her children, and a television show we both watched, and it was the most normal I had felt in months. Her husband came the following weekend to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen that my husband had never gotten around to repairing. Danielle sent me a message on social media 3 weeks after the dinner. 3 sentences. She apologized for her role. She told me she had not known he was married when they started seeing each other. He had told her he was separated, a lie that served him and cost him nothing. She said she had ended things the night of the dinner and had not spoken to him since. I believed her, or I chose to believe her, which amounted to the same thing. I did not reply. The divorce was finalized in November of 2023, 8 months after I first saw that credit card statement on the kitchen counter. I kept the house, I kept the car, I kept primary physical custody of our daughter, with a visitation schedule that gave him every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer. I did not ask for alimony because I did not need it, and I did not want to give him the satisfaction of resenting a monthly payment he would probably have stopped making within a year anyway. I did ask for the lot in Spotsylvania County, not to live on, but to sell, with the proceeds placed in a college savings account for our daughter. The judge granted the request. He did not contest it. He could not afford to. The resolution came quietly, the way real transformations always do. In January of 2024, I took down the framed wedding photograph that had been hanging in the front hallway for 11 years. It was a large print, 24 by 36 inches, in a heavy silver frame that had taken 2 people to mount. I took it down alone on a Wednesday afternoon while my daughter was at school. I carried it to the garage and leaned it against the wall next to the recycling bin. I did not feel anything when I did it. I drove to a local art fair that weekend and bought a print of a landscape painting. The Blue Ridge Mountains at sunset, warm oranges and deep purples layered across the canvas in a way that made me feel small, in a way that was comforting rather than diminishing. I hung it in the same spot using the same hooks because I did not want to patch the drywall. My daughter asked why I had taken the old picture down. I told her that some pictures belong to who you used to be, and the wall was ready for who you are now. She was 7 years old and she accepted that answer without question. I still live in the house. I still work as a forensic accountant, though I have taken on more freelance clients since the divorce and fewer corporate contracts. I like the flexibility. I like choosing who I work with. I like knowing that every dollar I earn is mine. The house looks different now. I painted the living room a deep sage green, a color I had wanted for years but never picked because he preferred beige. I bought a new dining table, round instead of rectangular, because I wanted to stop sitting at the end and start sitting somewhere in the middle. I replaced the white ceramic dishes with dark blue ones. Small changes, but each one is a decision I made for myself, without consulting anyone, without considering whether anyone else would approve. I have started teaching a course at a community college, a financial literacy for women going through divorce, and I have found that I am good at it in a way that surprises me. The first class I taught had 12 students. By the fourth class, there were 31 word spreads among women who have been told they are not good with money, who have been managed our financial decisions the same way I was. I tell them the same thing I wish someone had told me. Get a bank account in your name only. Know what you own. Keep copies of every document. Trust your instincts, especially when they tell you something is wrong, because your instincts are often smarter than your hope. My daughter is doing well. She asks about her father less often now than she did in the first few months. When she does, I answer honestly and without visible emotion. I do not want her to inherit my anger. I want her to inherit my independence, my competence, my unwillingness to be treated as less than I am. I want her to know that a deed in your own name is not a contingency plan, it is a foundation. And that the word leech is always, always a confession. I have started working with a therapist, something I never did during the marriage because I told myself I was too busy and too functional to need one. She asked me once what I felt when I thought about the word leech. I told her I did not feel anything anymore. She said that was progress. I am not sure if she was right, but I trust her, and I show up every other Tuesday at 4 o'clock and try to be honest with someone other than myself for an hour at a time. The lavender is blooming now. I planted it in the spring after the divorce was finalized, along the front walkway, in a strip of soil that had been empty since we moved in. It comes back every year without being asked. It does not need anyone's permission to grow. I water it in the evenings when the sun is low and the shadows stretch long across the lawn, and I think about how strange and wonderful it is to build a life you actually want after spending so many years building a life someone else expected you to want. The lavender has survived 2 winters now. I take that as a sign. I do not know what comes next. But I have a house that is mine, legally and unequivocally, with a deed that bears my name and no one else's. I have a daughter who is thriving, a career I built with my own hands, and a lavender garden that survived its first Virginia winter. I have a fireproof safe in my bedroom closet that contains my father's will, the notarized gift letter, and 3 binders of evidence I have not thrown away and probably never will. Not because I expect to need them again, but because they remind me of something I spent 11 years forgetting. that the word leech was never a description of me. It was a confession of his own inadequacy, projected onto the person who had been holding everything together while he searched for an exit. I think about my father often, and the envelope he handed me in a parking lot in Arlington on a hot September afternoon in 2017. He must have known not about the affair, not about the secret accounts, but about the possibility. He must have looked at the man I was about to marry and seen something I was too in love to see. And instead of warning me, instead of trying to change my mind, he built a structure of protection around me that I did not know I had until I needed it. That is a kind of love I will never be able to repay. But I think I am honoring it by living the way I do now, carefully, independently, and without apology. I do not know what I would have done if my father had not given me that envelope. I do not know if I would have had the courage to file those documents, or the resources to walk away cleanly, or the leverage to keep my home and my daughter and my life. But I know that every person, every woman especially, deserves to have something of their own: a deed, a bank account, a skill, a secret. Because love is not a contract and trust is not collateral, and the people who call you a leech are very often standing on the foundation that you built. So I will ask you the same question I asked myself every night between the day I found that credit card statement and the day I set those documents on the dining room table in front of his mother and his sister and his mistress, and the birthday cake I had bought for a woman who was about to learn that her son was not the person she thought he was. If everything you have was suddenly called into question, what would you have left that nobody could take away? I would love to hear your answer in the comments, and where you are watching from. If you have your own version of a deed hiding in a fireproof safe, I hope you find the courage to use it when the time comes. And if you want to hear more stories about the things we find when we are brave enough to look, I hope you will subscribe. This has been Hidden Family Noir. Thank you for listening.